The people of Finland are a hardy lot, I think, living up in the Baltic Circle. It's still very cold there this time of year, and the harsh climate has forced the Finnish people to surround themselves with music. When you're closed up inside, what's better than to create a song? Well, we're going to listen to the sounds of Finland on A Note to You. I'm Virginia Eskin. To me, that's the sound of the elements. We've been listening to music composed by Kaija Saariaho, and she's a Finnish woman composer, and that was called I.O. for chamber orchestra, tape, and live electronics. Just a little portion of it, played by the Avanti Chamber Orchestra, conducted by Jukka-Pekka Sarasta. Anything to do with Finland has a lot of K's in it, I've noticed, and it's such a wonderfully onomatopoetic language. I've been trying to wrap my tongue around it today, because this language is very much a part of what makes Finnish music have its own peculiar sound. It's rhythmic, and at the same time, it's sort of asymmetrical, because the emphasis is always on the first syllable of a word or a name, and in that way, it's not like a Romance language, which usually goes to the middle of the word. The way Finland mirrors itself in the arts is really very interesting. We've had a good time trying to define it for ourselves. What my music ears tell me is that the language is sort of in 5/4, 7/4. It's not in a standard cadence, the speaking language, and that inevitably rubs off on people when they pick up an instrument and, of course, when they sing. And Finland has a curious history. It was ruled by Russians for a long time, almost from 1721 till 1917, and that has an inevitable effect, of course, on the culture of a country. But we're going to go back to just a little folk segment here. A man, he'd be a traditional folkloric person, maybe a farmer or a miller or something like that, and he's singing a song to his sweetheart. And it's sweet the way he sings it. It's very plain. It's painfully plain. But listen to all the strange syllables that he hits on, and also listen to the way he starts the beginning of each cadence right on the first beat. He doesn't sort of go to the middle of the phrase. Here it is, My Sweetheart.
Heilallani on kamari, kullaki tuupa uusi. Heilani kamarilla siinä allon kukkalarva kuusi. Heilani kamarilla siinä allon kukkalarva kuusi. Kukkalarva kuusessa sekä kilintu laulaa. En ole kättäni ojentanut tämän kylän likkain kaulaan. Enkä ole kättäni ojentanut tämän kylän likkain kaulaan. Heilani osaa kirjoittaa, se on minutkin opettanut. Rakkauden reiviä olen heilalta odottanut. Rakkauden reiviä olen heilalta odottanut. Mikä tuolla järvellä pilkottaa, siellä taitaa olla saari. 5 ja 6 pitäjässä on pojalla appivaari. 5 ja 6 pitäjässä on pojalla appivaari. Taitaa tulla ilmanmuutos, kun lännеstä ruskottelee. Eikä se poikaa tyttövä ota, vaikka se uskottelee. Eikä se poikaa tyttövä ota, vaikka se uskottelee.
So that's just a little example of what we're talking about. That was sung by Aleksei Sulkakowski, and there are all those nice KKKs. Well, singing in Finland depends on having strong lungs, and they love to sing, and they have all that nice, clean oxygen, I think coming from the beautiful forests, which are not spoiled, like a lot of Central Europe. The next thing you'll hear in this little upcoming segment is the folk rhythm. Eventually, masters like Sibelius and some of the other composers on today's program definitely pay homage to their folk origins, especially in this point of rhythm. And let's listen to a little portion of the Sibelius Violin Concerto. Now, let's listen to how a folk violinist, or he's really playing on a 3-stringed harp, but it sounds like a Sibelius style, sort of a little riff, only it was composed many, many years before. The image that comes to my mind is that some violinist stayed in the sauna too long and got hit on the head with too much birch bark. Anyway, I think it's very interesting that the folkloric sounds definitely have their beginnings with all this odd 5/4 rhythm that I'm talking about, that dun, 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 dun. And then Sibelius picks up on it, and we heard a little bit of Itzhak Perlman playing with the Boston Symphony just a minute ago. And then we heard the 3-stringed bowed harp, and then the last instrument was the kantala, and that is also a profoundly important instrument to the Finns, and it's kind of a zither-like instrument. It was used to accompany the runo songs, and when you read back in 900, 1100, Finns would apparently interlock their fingers, a man and a woman, and they'd sit on a bench, and they would sing in ancient runo dialect. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they had a kantala to accompany them. Finnish is a bright and beautiful language. As I said before, it's not a romance language exactly, but it's very multisyllabic, and that makes it ideal to use in music. Now, here's another little love song, and this is sung by a famous singer of opera today, Jorma Hininen. It's called Hilu Hilu. It's a cute little poem. He's saying that it's chilly, 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 hili, hili, hilu. And he's in the candlelight chamber of his lover, and he's looking at her pretty shoes. They all got wet. I guess they were running through the snow, and the candles burnt away, and he's thinking maybe the love is half burnt away. And then just then a gray cuckoo comes to the cottage window, and while Mom and Pop snooze, the boys will run and get loose. So it paints a little picture. But listen again to the beautiful language of the Finnish words as they roll along. It's just delicious.
Hilu, 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 kun tuli vilu tuolla kynttilävalakialla, vaikka helaistu polvella keinus tuolissa kammarin lattialla. Silikistä sammetista nirunarru kengät oli entisellä heinällani. Ja enkä minä häntä riannut, kun ilman pirikallani. Puoleksi palannut se kynttilä oli, mutta toinen puoli paloi vielä. Ja puoleksi sammunut rakkaus mul oli. Hällä se roihusi vielä. Tuli harma ja käki minun mökkini päälle kukkun. Ja silloin ne pojat kylällä lähtee, kun muoria vaarin nukkuu.
That was a delicious transcription of that song. It had a lot of cute little atonal bits by Ralph Gottoni, and it was sung by Jorma Hininen, accompanied by Ilmari Rekkonen. I think that it must be very hard for Americans to sing in Finnish. I don't think I ever even hear of people doing it. And there's a paucity of Finnish music being played at concerts. There's a whole wave of young Finnish conductors who've come to America. The main one is Esa-Pekka Salonen, who's the conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And I think they have to tread rather carefully, though. You can't play a lot of Finnish music just because you're a Finnish conductor. But I think we should hear more of it, and I hope after today's program you agree. Now, our next selection comes from Selim Palmgren, and he's considered apparently the Chopin of Finland. These piano pieces illustrate the Finnish connection with the elements. And we mentioned the long, winter, weary landscape, maybe 8 months of a year. They're buried under snow and ice. And if you're surrounded by endless winter, you might as well get behind it and celebrate it. This first piano piece is called Snowflakes, and there's this kind of an ostinato on top, meaning a dun, 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 little sort of steady notes that are pointed out, and then a melody in the left hand. And that's reminiscent of the way Debussy wrote in his snow pieces. And the second piece is by Erkki Melartin, and it's called Rain. So we've got Snowflakes and Rain. So those were two pieces played by Isumi Taitano, and he must be a Japanese pianist, but he's fallen in love with Finnish music. It was by Palmgren and Melartin, and they were Snowflakes and Rain, and even if you didn't know, because I hadn't told you, you would hear all those rhythmic patterns, and all this Finnish music is very ordered in that way. I don't think they like amorphic stuff that sort of just drags along. All the music that we have prepared for the program has a lot of shape to it. And music education seems to be very much a part of your life. If you grow up in Finland, young people are taught to sing from an early age, and they speculate because the language is so difficult to speak, when kids are little, it's easier to sing, and that way it helps you to learn to speak this difficult language. And way back in 1582, boy choirs seemed to be formed. Apparently they'd go out into the countryside essentially to make money, but they were also sponsored by the church and schools. So if you have young boys learning to sing and having a good time, it follows there'll be a choral tradition, and there is to this day. And this next selection is by the famous Jan Sibelius, who's really the father of Finnish music, even though there was a long tradition before him. And this is a very nice piece, I think beautifully sung by the Helsinki University Chorus. It's made up of young men and older men, and they have a very vigorous, virile sound to them. And the piece is about the elements, and they sing about the storm, how it rumbles and whines and clatters on the window panes, and how I wish you could lean against my knees. You know, there's always this kind of nostalgia that folds itself in. I think that's because it's so cold. And even in those piano pieces, it touched my heart the way they were. There was nothing static or indifferent about the music. And wait till you hear these young men singing. The storm is raging, but there's a kind of a questing quality, and they're saying there's a richer goal in life and that the storm will go away. They seem to accept the fact that life has a lot of storms in it, because I think when you live in Finland, it's very stormy. So here it is, Out There in the Storm. Well, it was sort of a gentle storm piece by Jan Sibelius, and it was sung by the Helsinki University Chorus. Matti Höckki conducting. Our next composer is Einar Englund, and he's considered one of Finland's most admired composers. He's a distinguished pianist. He lived from 1916 to about 1999, so that's a pretty good long life, and he even spent time playing in restaurants to support himself. And to my ears, he reflects the Russian influence, because we know that the Russians controlled Finland, was seceded to them in 1721 until 1917. And so a lot of Russians went up there to play, and there's been a lot of forth and back between Russia and Finland. And this first movement from Englund's piano trio, composed as late as 1982, but if you wanted to play a trick on somebody, it sounds really like Shostakovich. Here it is. was just the first movement from Einar Englund's piano trio, composed in about 1982, played by the trio Finico. And it's on the Finlandia label. It's interesting, this country sponsors musicians, sets them up well, and pays for many recordings. It sounds utopian. I'm Virginia Eskin, and today on A Note to You, we're listening to the rich tradition of music from Finland. If you want to write to us, our address is A Note to You, care of WGBH Radio, 125 Western Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. The email address is anotettoyou@wgbh.org. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. Well, now we go to the king, really, of Finnish music, and that would be Jan Sibelius. And he's called the voice of Finland, and the reason for that is because he systematically looked back to the great culture that existed of their long tales. Every country has some mythic figure, like our Paul Bunyan is sort of some larger-than-life creature. And the Finns were very proud that Sibelius addressed all of the things that tell the story of life in Finland. But it's interesting, when he went abroad to study to Vienna and later to Berlin, his teachers decried that and said, you shouldn't really use those folk sounds in your music. And he was first he was mad, and then he was embarrassed. Eventually, though, he turns his back on that advice, and he turned right back to his culture, and he wrote pieces about the Kalevala, the Kullervo, or the Karelia suite, or the Kikili piano pieces, and these are all taken from their great folk storytelling culture. And when he returned to Finland, he was treated as a hero because he had sort of stood up to the Europeans, and they made him head of the conservatory there. They call it the Sibelius Institute, and he was set up in a fine house, and he was more or less given a mandate to compose and to sort of get down to the serious business of being Finland's composer. And he was very lucky because there was a critic in New York, Olin Downs, who was crazy about him, and he opened the doors because when some of his early symphonies were performed, they weren't exactly rapturous, the New York critics, but Olin Downs was, and he kept beating on people's heads saying that Sibelius was a giant and we should embrace him. And eventually we have, of course. He's now an icon. If you say Finland, the next thing you say is Sibelius. So our program wouldn't be complete without maybe a small piece from him. And this is just a little rondo for cello, taken sort of from middle period of Jan Sibelius's oeuvre. music of Sibelius, and boy, it is frankly romantic. It was played by Arto Norras, the cellist, accompanied by Tapani Valasta. When you look at the output, no wonder Sibelius is considered sort of the father and the real voice of Finland because, of course, he composed 7 symphonies and major tone poems, all kinds of quartets and salon pieces, a lot of nice piano music, I'm surprised to see. And our next composer, Aulis Sallinen, is alive, and his music has a kind of Slavic quality. And this cello concerto was actually commissioned by the Finnish radio back in 1977. It's very accessible music. It's not atonal, and it's not hard to take. It has a very nice quality about it, though, and it certainly showcases the cello. This piece is played by the same cellist we just heard, and he's a Finn himself, Arto Norras. So here's the second movement from Aulis Sallinen's cello concerto. sparkling Finnish music we've been listening to. That was the second movement from the cello concerto by Aulis Sallinen, and was played by a really crack cellist, Arto Norras, backed up by the Helsinki Philharmonic Orchestra. Okko Kamu was conducting. There are those keywords again. We're going to round out the program with the most important Finnish composer writing music today. He's in his 70s, and his name is Aino Juhani Rautavaara. And I'm looking at a booklet here that his publisher sent to America recently, and it reminds me of Sibelius, just in sheer output, because it's very impressive. This man has written in all the forms: symphonic, string orchestras, soloists, stage works, all kinds of interesting ensemble, string quartets, solo piano instruments, and then, of course, he's gotten into the beginning of electronic instruments. He's got a wonderful face. He looks like a storyteller himself. He has very piercing eyes and a kindly expression. This music is from his string quartet, and it is accessible. It was written back in 1958. The piece we just heard was from about 1976. But all of this music is extremely likable. I don't find anything grating or hideous or repetitive. And it all honors the instruments that it's being written for. And so that makes it very pleasurable for musicians to play. There's nothing we hate more than having to make beauty out of some kind of Scratch-a-various stuff that a composer cobbles together. So here is the second movement of Rautavaara's String Quartet, number 2. That was just a movement from Aino Juhani Rautavaara's string quartet, and he's very much alive. And we're going to end the program with paying real homage to Finnish folk culture and the famous Kalevala legend. It's really the national epic poem of Finland. It was started to be written way back in 800 to about 1300. And the heroes in the legend are human ones. They're not spiritual or from Christianity. They tell the story of real humans and all their issues. And the suite addresses the birth of the earth and the sprouts of spring and lullabies. And the movement that we're going to hear is called the Forging of the Sampo. And we looked up what is the Sampo. It sounded to me like something, a nice drink. But it turns out it's not that at all. It's a magic mill. It must be sort of like a mortar and pestle or like a pepper mill. And if you have this, you will be insured of an unending wealth and good luck and lots of work, and you'll be loved by everybody. So everybody wants the Sampo, naturally. And it gets smashed in the legend and lost. And the fragments wash up on the land, and the people who pick up the fragments, of course, they have eternal growth and prosperity. The composer who first addressed all of this colorful stuff was Sibelius. But you're not going to hear his version of it. You're going to hear a man whose name is Uuno Klami. He was born in 1900 and he died in 61. But he also loved the Kalevala legend, and he broke free of Sibelius's influence. They describe his music as being more like Stravinsky's, and that gets back to what I said before, because there was such a connection to Russia. And this movement is sort of mythic, and in that way it reminds us of Sibelius or some of the great tone poems by Richard Strauss. But eventually he brings in some folkloric rhythms too. You'll hear that very soon. So here's the Forging of the Sampo from the Kalevala suite by Uuno Klami. a beautiful, stirring work. And what you heard was just the forging of the sampo, composed by Uuno Klami, taken from the great Kalevala legend. At the very end, a great hunter ensures his victory because he sent a beautiful, mighty bear. And I love the image of that. And the idea that a golden chalice or a golden bowl or all these things that in legends sometimes get people into trouble because they're imbued with surreal powers that will make you well and rich. And then when you don't have that magic bowl or chalice or sampo, then you're very unhappy. Well, I'm all set to go to Finland. My husband this morning said, would you like to take a trip? And so now I want to go and meet Finnish composers. Our sortie to the Baltic Circle has ended, and you've been listening to A Note to You. Our engineer today is Alan Mattis, and our producer is Alan McClellan. And I'm Virginia Eskin. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. It's produced by Northeastern University in cooperation with WGBH Radio, Boston.